So this video is part 2 of the 2-part Dance of the Dragons video. So if you haven't watched Dance of the Dragons part 1 with Aegon II, and if you haven't watched the Viserys video along with the Dance of the Dragons prequel, I would watch those first before watching this video. Otherwise you won't have any idea what's going on and it'll be super confusing with all the names being thrown at you. So make sure you watch part 1 first, at least. So where we left off is, Rhaenyra and Aegon have both let each other know, I am the rightful ruler of Westeros and I will not back down. As this transpired, the Sea Snake's ships went to close the gullet and cut off trade to and from King's Landing. Rhaenyra's boys, Jace and Luke, were sent on their missions for diplomacy, and Prince Daemon, Rhaenyra's husband, was heading to the Trident to deal with Harrenhal. Prince Daemon was successful in his endeavor. He brought the dragon, Caraxes, down upon Harrenhal, capturing it and the wealth of House Strong with it. And he also got some very valuable hostages. So Prince Daemon, successful, he has Harrenhal. Jace flew his dragon, Virmax, to the north and talked to Lady Arryn of the Vale, Lord Manderley of White Harbor, Lord Burrell and Lord Sunderland of Sisterun, and Cragen Stark of Winterfell. Each lady and lord he visited was charmed into supporting his mother, and, a little bit afraid of the dragon too, but mostly charmed by him, and decided to join his mother. So, as of right now, Rhaenyra is basically 3 for 3 on her plans. The Sea Snake is cutting off trade to and from King's Landing, Prince Daemon, her husband, has taken Harrenhal, and Jace has convinced those in the north to join his mother. However, problems began when Luke, who had taken into the south to treat with the Lord Baratheon at Storm's End. There was a terrible storm, and Jace had raced to get to Storm's End and land in the courtyard. When he landed, he found that he hadn't arrived first, and King Aemon's younger brother, Aemon, arrived before him with his dragon Vhagar, which was the biggest, scariest dragon. This guy, I believe, was like 181 when he died, so, it was around with Aegon's conquest. It was one of those dragons. So it's a really feared, experienced old dragon. Despite this, Luke went to the Round Hall, where he found Lord Boros Baratheon, his 4 daughters, knights, guards, servants, a septon, and maester, and, unfortunately, Aemon Targaryen. Despite Aemon Targaryen mocking him and insulting him, Luke only talked to Lord Boros Baratheon because he had promised his mother that he wasn't going to fight. This was just a diplomacy mission, and he ended up giving the letter from his mother to Lord Baratheon. Lord Baratheon wasn't much for reading letters for whatever reason, so he handed it to his maester, who whispered the contents of the note into his ear. Lord Baratheon asked which daughter would Luke marry, pointing to his 4 daughters, and Luke replied he was not free to marry, and he was betrothed to his cousin Rhaena. Lord Baratheon tells him basically, go home to your bitch mother, I'm not a dog that will come when someone simply whistles, if you're not going to marry any of my daughters, get out of here, you have nothing for me. And that is when the trouble began. Prince Luke simply turned to leave. His job was done, he failed, whatever, he was ready to go, but Aemon drew his sword and wouldn't let him. Aemon was ready to draw blood and wanted him done. It was just taunting him, calling him a strong and a bastard and a traitor, and just going on and on. Luke told him he wasn't there to fight, despite the taunts from Aemon, and he ended up leaving when Lord Boros was like, there is no blood under my roof. When you're under my roof, there's no fighting. He was an envoy, just let him go. So Luke ends up going into the castle courtyard. It's still storming. It's terrible outside. He gets on his dragon. He's struggling to stay up in the storm. And Aemon is just fuming in the hall, like he's just that his cousin is escaping. So finally, Aemon asks Lord Baratheon, can I leave? And, he goes, well, it's not for me to tell you what you do when you're not under my roof. So Aemon ends up rushing outside, mounts his dragon, and goes after his cousin. Massive flames, there's shrieks in the sky, fighting is happening. Finally, Luke's dragon falls to the waters of the bay, and Luke's corpse washes up on the shore with the head of its dragon days later. This death of Luke and Rhaenyra hearing this ends the envoys, words, and treaties. Fire and blood will now be used to fight this war. Rhaenyra, at the news of Luke's death, collapses, while Luke's younger brother, Joffrey, claims an oath to kill Lord Boros and Aemon. He's just furious. Prince Daemon, who is still in Harrenhal, ends up hearing about this and writes to them that, it needs to be an eye for an eye, a son for a son, Lucerys will be avenged. And if you've watched my prequel to the Dance of the Dragons, You know Prince Daemon used to be Lord Commander of the City Watch, and there he made quite a few friends, which includes whores, gamblers, cut purses, gold cloaks, people at the court, and even some of those that are in the Green Party Council. His once paramour, Misery the White Worm, was contacted again by him and given a mission. For this mission, she ends up utilizing two individuals, a man now called Blood, who had lost his gold cloak when he beat a whore to death in a drunken rage, and a man now called Cheese, who was a rat catcher in the Red Keep. Cheese ended up using the secret doors and tunnels Maegor the Cruel had built and led Blood into the castle, into the Tower of the Hand, where Queen Alicent now lived. Well, the Dowager Queen Alicent now lived. Inside, Cheese ended up bounding her, he gagged her, and Blood killed her handmaid. They then waited for the Queen Helena to bring her children to visit her mother and their grandmother, which they often did. So Helena ends up eventually at dusk taking her children, the twins Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, both 6 years old, and then her youngest son Maelor, who was only 2. And Blood, once they're inside, blocks the door, kills the Queen's guardsman. Cheese grabs a 2-year-old Maelor and, tells him, if you scream, I will kill you. They then give Queen Helena a terrible choice. They tell her that they are debt collectors, and they tell her that she needs to pick which child she wants to die, Maelor or Jaehaerys. And she just begs them, just kill me, please don't make me pick. And they tell her, you pick one or we kill everyone. So finally she ends up picking Maelor, and some people argue why she did it. Maybe he was 2, he wouldn't remember this. Jaehaerys was going to be the heir of the kingdom. She didn't want him dead. But basically, yeah, she eventually breaks down, picks Maelor, and they end up whispering to the little boy Maelor, you hear that, little boy? Your mama wants you dead. And Blood grins and cuts off Jaehaerys' head in a single strike instead. True to their word, Blood and Cheese, they leave, and Queen Helena was never the same after this. She lived with the knowledge that her son knew that she had chosen him to die. She refused to bathe, eat, leave her chambers, or even look at her son Maelor. Eventually, King Aegon had to give Maelor to his mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, to raise, because Helena just spiraled into depression. So King Aegon II, he begins to rage. He has lost Harrenhal, he then lost the Burning Mill and the Stonehenge. The lords in the south were declaring allegiance to Rhaenyra, including the Three Towers, the Uplands, Hornhill, Golden Grove, the Grey Shield. The blockade the Sea Snake put up has vexed Aegon II. He has to continuously hear from the merchants complaining to him about how they can't trade in and out. He tells his hand, Sir Otto Hightower, you need to do something about this. And then he doesn't move fast enough for Aegon II, so he dismisses him and makes Sir Criston Cole, the Kingmaker, his new hand instead. And they end up utilizing a list that the Master Whispers helped create of all the lords who attended Queen Rhaenyra's coronation. And they then strike out at them. They first take Duskendale, beheading Lord Darkland, and then they take Rosby and Stokeworth, who actually then end up turning to their cause. Next they march on Rook's Rest. However, Lord Saunton was warned and he closed his gates. Sir Criston Cole had Lord Saunton's fields, villages burned. Then eventually the lords of Rook Rest sent a desperate letter to Dragonstone begging for help. The plea was answered in 9 days when Rhaenys Targaryen, the wife of the Sea Snake, appeared on her dragon, known as the Red Queen. Sir Criston Cole ordered for archers to fire at her. They had already planned ahead. They knew that eventually someone was coming for them, so they had the bolts, the scorpions, to fly and try to kill the dragon. The dragon was hit a few times, but Rhaenys continued to rain fire down on them until King Aegon arrived on Sunfire and Aemon on Vhagar. However, Rhaenys Targaryen was a fierce woman, and she did not back down or flee. This woman was in her 50s, crazy bold and strong. She was known as the queen that never was, but she was intense. The dragons fought ruthlessly until the Red Queen snapped around Sunfire's neck and Vhagar descended upon her. All 3 dragons end up spiraling to the ground, and they strike the stones super hard. So hard that anyone close just does not live. They're burned, the dust and everything coming out, just people are killed. Vhagar was unharmed. Unfortunately, the Red Queen was dead, along with what was assumed to be the blackened body of the bold Rhaenys. Sunfire had one wing missing, while Aegon II suffered far worse. The dragon flame had melted his flesh onto half of his body, and his body and his flesh was stuck to the armor, and that was combined with a broken hip and ribs. He was in terrible shape. So the king had to be taken to King's Landing and remained in bed for the rest of the year while the Septons prayed for him and the Maesters tried to heal him. His dragon Sunfire couldn't fly due to being injured, having the wing torn off, and so he fed on the burned carcasses of the slain, and then the men of Sir Criston Cole ended up feeding him sheep and other animals. While the king was recovering, it fell to Prince Aemon to rule the realm in Aegon's stead. Despite the gathering of forces at White Harbor, Winterfell, Barrowtown, Cisteron, Goldtown, and the Gates of the Moon, Aemon didn't feel they were the threat. He wanted to take out his uncle, Prince Daemon, at Harrenhal. At the same time, back at Dragonstone, Jace is trying to calm down the sea snake because his wife Rhaenys had just died, and he blamed that on Rhaenyra, saying, it should have been you didn't want to send your sons, you didn't want to send yourself, you sent my wife, and now she's dead. So instead, Jace, trying to calm him down, said, you want to know what, you are now the hand of the queen. And they began to make plans to assault upon King's Landing and get their revenge. Also decided it would be best to secure the children. They sent Joffrey to the Vale with his dragon, telling him that he was defending it from Aegon's dragons, but most likely just trying to keep him safe out of the way. So they are trying to get Joffrey, the youngest of the boys, out of the way from Rhaenyra's first marriage. Rhaena, who is the 13-year-old daughter of Daemon from his late wife, Laena Velaryon, is supposed to go with him. And then Joffrey's half-brothers, Aegon the Younger, who's 9, and Viserys, who's 7, are brought to be boarded on the Gay Abandon to set sail for Essos. There they think that the two boys will be safe, and they can keep them hidden, and Aegon and Viserys, if you remember, are the children of Daemon and Rhaenyra. And so the two boys end up getting on the ships, Aegon with his dragon Stormcloud, who he has never rode before, and then Viserys with his dragon Egg, and they want to keep them protected until the Mother's Kingdom is won. So the warships are sent ahead to protect them on their journey to Pentos. This just was such bad timing, as with a lot of things that tend to happen in the Dance of the Dragons, just bad timing. Otto Hightower, when he was still the Hand of the King, had requested help from the enemies of Daemon Targaryen, the Triarchy, or Three Daughters. They finally set sail from the Stepstones with 90 warships when they heeded his letter, heading to the Gullet to break the Sea Snake's blockade. On this journey, they happened upon the Gay Abandon with the two princes. Prince Aegon the Younger managed to mount his dragon, Stormcloud, and ride for the first time. He escaped Dragonstone to tell what happened. His dragon died shortly after succumbing to the wounds it had received as it tried to escape. Viserys couldn't escape and was captured. Prince Jace went after the ships on Vermax. He was mad. He lit many of the ships on fire. The ships fought and launched spears and arrows to take the dragon down. And then, with luck for him, 4 other dragons appeared: Silverwing, Sheepstealer, Seasmoke, and Vermithor. The ships were doomed, and the lines were shattering. For some reason, at some point, I don't know why, Vermax ends up flying too low and crashes into the sea. Jace manages to grab a piece of wreckage to stay afloat, but the men fire arrows at him, and one takes it in the neck and ends up sinking. So we have the oldest of Rhaenyra's boys dead, so Jace is dead, Luke is dead now. She has Joffrey left from her first marriage, but she still has Aegon the Younger, and Viserys is probably not going to be alive for much longer now that he is captured. So not a lot of her kids are left alive, but of the 90 ships that the Triarchy had brought to try to break the blockade, only 28 made it. Even though so many were destroyed, though, they managed to devastate Driftmark, and Spicetown was sacked, the occupants slaughtered, the buildings burned, and the town has never been rebuilt since. The Sea Snake's home was ravaged, most of his treasure gone, and his fleet lost 2/3 of its strength. So you gotta understand, the Sea Snake probably is getting a little upset now. His wife has died, and then, you have the 3 daughters who end up coming and just wiping out his homeland, taking his treasure, killing his people. His fleet is losing strength. Things are looking a little bad for him. Despite all this going on, Rhaenyra and Daemon have finished plans for taking King's Landing as Aemon begins to march on Harrenhal. So Aemon is ignoring everything else, and he's like, I am taking care of Daemon. He is getting out of Harrenhal. This is mine. When he arrives, the castle is empty. At first thought, he thinks, oh, this is a victory, and then he realizes the true meaning of the desertion. Daemon had met Queen Rhaenyra and her dragon riders over King's Landing. The only one left, with Aegon being bedridden and Aemon at Harrenhal, was the Dowager Queen Alicent, and she was yelling for defenses. Unknown to her, though, the Gold Cloak, still loyal to Daemon, turned on the officers, and King's Landing was taken with very little blood. So all the friends Daemon had made really worked out to their advantage, because a lot of those Gold Cloaks were his friend, and then the officers that Aegon II had put in place, they had already taken care of. So with the dragons, Sheepstealer rested on Visenya's Hill, Silverwing and Vermithor on the Hill of Rhaenys next to the Dragon Pit, and then Adam Valerian on Seasmoke circled the city walls looking for trouble. If you don't remember who has each of the dragons, I showed a chart last time, but I'll put it up now again so you can kind of get an idea of who is who. In King's Landing, the Dowager Queen Alicent tried to make peace with Rhaenyra, but she wouldn't hear any of it. They ended up executing Sir Otto Hightower, the Master of Laws, Rosby, Stalksworth, who had turned against Rhaenyra. The Dowager Queen Alicent was imprisoned, but Aegon and his children were taken out of the castle in secret. So despite all the executions and everything, Aegon and his kids were gone. Aegon ends up going to Dragonstone to hide. Unfortunately, he doesn't take his child Maelor. Rickard Thorne of the Kingsguard takes Maelor and is trying to get him to Oldstown in secret, where he would be secure in Hightower. At Bitterbridge, he stopped, and Maelor is torn to pieces as a mob tries to claim the infant for their own prize. This eventually gets back to another Lord of Hightower, and they end up razing Bitterbridge in retaliation. Queen Rhaenyra, taking King's Landing, has decided she wants to sit at her throne at last. She has been fighting for this. She has lost children over this. She is going to sit on that throne right now. Still in her armor, the throne ends up cutting her all over. This causes some people to think it's a sign of the throne rejecting her, and she shouldn't rule, and that her days are numbered, and anytime she's on the throne, it cuts her a lot. She sits on the throne all night, and men and women in the Red Keep kneel before her, they beg forgiveness, they swear their swords, they swear her honor, they basically say, "We're for you." Back in Harrenhal, Aemon is in a rage now that he knows what's happened. He decided that he's going to part with Sir Criston Cole, who would withdraw to the south, and Aemon would burn the traitors and cause havoc until Rhaenyra sent a dragon one by one to stop him. He knew that she wouldn't send all the dragons from King's Landing because she was super cautious, but he figured if he burned the villages and lands of the River Lords, that eventually she would send maybe a dragon out, and then he'd kill that dragon, and then maybe she'd send 2 more out, and he would kill those, and whittle down her forces. Sir Criston Cole heads to the south, and unfortunately he is killed on his way to the south, and his men, who he took from Harrenhal, ended up breaking and fleeing because they don't have a leader anymore. Queen Rhaenyra is still at King's Landing. It's not going to last. The people in King's Landing never really loved Aegon II or Aemon, so they delighted in Rhaenyra ruling. However, as more heads appeared on the spikes and taxes increased, that love started to turn sour. But even though it's turning sour, Rhaenyra feels pretty secure in her throne. She has 6 dragons. She ends up sending for her young son, Aegon the Younger, and Joffrey. Even the Valyrian fleet has turned the Triarchy away and remained in control. So Rhaenyra's feeling pretty good. She has 6 dragons. She has King's Landing. The Valyrian fleet has taken care of the Triarchy. They are in control. Things are okay. However, she still has some enemies. Aemon is terrorizing the Trident, and it needs to be dealt with. She knows that. Aegon II and Aemon's youngest brother, Daeron, leads a southern force with Lord Ormond Hightower, and they're becoming a big problem. More of a problem than Aemon terrorizing the Trident. Lord Boris Baratheon also is not on friendly terms, and probably will stick a knife in their back at the same time. Lannisters are still not on their side, but they've been broken so much that they're not much of a concern right now. There's a lot of chaos in Casterly Rock, so they're not really concerned about that. Rhaenyra decides that Joffrey, Aegon, Adam Valerian are going to remain at King's Landing with their 3 dragons. 6 dragons total will remain in King's Landing. Unfortunately, 3 of them aren't on their side, so really it's only 3 dragons, but the 5 of them are going to remain in the Dragon Pit, And the Queen's Dragon, Syrex, is the only dragon that's going to remain in King's Landing, chained up. Aegon Valerian was to guard the dragon pits, and the others would be going to deal with issues. Daemon ends up getting on his dragon Caraxes, and Nettles, a dragon seed who tamed Sheep Stealer, to go to the Trident and take care of Aemon and his dragon. White and Hugh Hammer, also dragon seeds, were to go to Tumbleton, southwest of King's Landing, to destroy Prince Darren and defend the stronghold from Lord Hightower and his forces. Tumbleton, the River Lords are gathering. Their numbers are close to 9,000. The battle rages on. Tumbleton and the River Lords against Lord Ormond Hightower, and eventually he's killed. The Hightower Lord is killed. So the joining of White and Hammer with their dragons would have been a game winner, but for some unknown reason they turned their allegiance, and nobody still has any idea. They were common people turned into dragon riders, so there's not really any idea of what prompted them to do this. Instead of fighting for Rhaenyra and the River Lords, they turned on them. They breathed fire on them, screaming, shrieking. It was a complete slaughter. Thousands and thousands were killed. Thousands drowned trying to cross the water to get away from the fire and smoke. Women were raped until they died. This betrayal shocked King's Landing. Her council convinced Rhaenyra that Aegon Valerian, also a bastard that was legitimized by taming a wild dragon, so a dragon seed as well, would turn on her next. Despite there being no proof of intended betrayal, Rhaenyra tried to imprison the grandson of the Sea Snake, Sir Aegon Valerian, and he tried to claim, the Sea Snake tried to claim that he was a bastard child of Lenore Valerian, that he legitimized, but some people think that he was actually the son of the Sea Snake, but we don't know. But when she is trying to arrest Aegon Valerian in case he betrays her, the Sea Snake betrays her and ends up helping his grandson or son, depending on who you believe, escape. And instead, the Sea Snake ends up being imprisoned for helping his grandson escape. This causes the Valerian fleet to kind of leave their cause because, their leader is in prison, so why should we stay here? Man, we're going home. So hundreds of them at a time were just like, we're out of here. The same reasoning started to cross over, and they said, well, what about Nettle? Nettle is with Daemon, and, she's probably going to betray him too. So she ends up sending a letter to Maidenpool, where Nettle and Daemon were based in their hunt for Aemon. And the letter says, kill Nettle, send Daemon back to me unharmed to King's Landing. Before this can be done, the Maester of Maidenpool alerts Daemon and lets him know what's going on. Daemon ends up helping Nettle escape, and she is never seen from again, and it's believed that Nettle and Daemon, they were lovers, and that Daemon's dragon, cried and just broke all the windows when she left because it was so sad. Daemon, instead of heading to King's Landing, heads to Harrenhal and tells the Lord of Maidenpool, I will always remember how gracious you were and all the things you did. And the Lord of Maidenpool just was so distraught by this, and so distraught that Queen Rhaenyra would send this letter to kill this poor child, that didn't have any proof of betrayal, that they end up changing their banners to Aegon II's banners, because they're like, this is BS, we are not following this crazy woman. Daemon ends up going to Harrenhal, he waits, he marks every day with his sword on a tree, he cuts a mark, and then finally on the 14th day, Aemon arrives with his lover who is pregnant. They greet each other, and they both get on their dragons to fight. Both dragons fight, they tear at each other, fire everywhere. Some tales say that it ended by Daemon Targaryen jumping from his dragon to Aemon's dragon with his sword Dark Sister, who is also Visenya's sword, in hand, and Daemon drives the sword into Aemon's good eye and down out his throat. Both dragons, regardless of whether that happened or not, they hit the lake, and neither dragon nor men survive. Aemon's body is found a few years later, strapped to his dragon, with Dark Sister rammed through his eye and his throat. Daemon's body is never recovered, and some say that he joined Nettles, and they lived together, and they lived happily ever after. There's no proof of that, but, singers like to exaggerate and have happy endings. Fortunately, with Tumbletown, a great panic is started in King's Landing. Thousands perished, and it was so brutal that the fear of dragons was sparked. The people of King's Landing were sure they were next. A shepherd came forth saying dragons were demons and the doom of men. He declared the city would only be safe when the city was cleansed of dragons. People began to gather and listen to them. They were so afraid of being next to die by dragon fire that it caused a huge mob. the mob marched intent to kill the dragons. Some loyal followers of the sea snake marched with them in hopes of freeing him. Queen Helena at this time ends up jumping. She might have been pushed, we don't know. And she falls from Maegor's holdfast and is impaled on spikes below. Whether she was killed or not, people claim she's murdered, and this also adds to the riots and the bloodbath. Marching into the dragon pits, young Joffrey ends up seeing them, and he tries to help his dragon escape by riding his mother's dragon, who is in King's Landing, to try to get to his dragon. The dragon only likes one rider, was not familiar with him, and ends up twisting his body to get the rider off of him mid-flight, and he plummets to his death. 5 dragons were killed in the mob attack, and 200 to what's estimated 2,000 people were killed in the attempt. Rhaenyra has no choice but to flee King's Landing. She has enemies everywhere. The Valyrians are against her now, especially now that her husband's dead and there's not that tie anymore. She's penniless. She has to sell her own crown to get passage back to Dragonstone, and she ends up taking some of her men and her only child left at this point, Aegon the Younger. Sir Adam Valerian at the same time wants to prove that he wasn't a traitor, and that, not all bastards have to be turncoats, and he manages to get 4,000 people to help reclaim Tumbleton. This results in the brave death of Sir Adam Valerian, and also the death of Prince Daeron, so Aemon and Aegon II's youngest brother, and 3 dragons. And even though it wasn't a success and they didn't get Tumbleton back, it still was a minor success, and they got rid of Daeron, and they also got rid of White and Hugh Hammer, who were getting a little crazy with power now that they had dragons. If you think about it, they were commoners, they got dragons, they had this power, and now they wanted more power, and they were taken care of as well by Sir Adam Valerian, so they were no longer a problem. Even though Rhaenyra said that Adam Valerian was a traitor, on his tomb it's carved loyal. So back to Rhaenyra, she finally gets to Dragonstone, but she doesn't know that Aegon had headed there when he secretly got out of the castle. And he had been recovering in there for a half a year with his dragon Sunfire that had managed to arrive despite having 1 wing. And it could fly, but it was like super clunky and terrible. And he met people at Dragonstone that had issues with Rhaenyra, so they helped Aegon take Dragonstone unknown to Rhaenyra. The only one that opposed him was Prince Daemon's daughter, Baela Targaryen, and her dragon, Moondancer. She fought with Aegon on his damaged dragon Sunfire. It ended with both dragons hitting the ground. King Aegon II broke both his legs, but Baela, unconscious, was spared by Sir daughters, and a maester saved her life. Rhaenyra didn't know any of this when she arrived, and when she got there with her young son Aegon, on the 22nd day of the 10th month of 130 AC, King Aegon II was waiting for her. And boy was he PO'd at this point. His legs are broken, he's lost so much, he's angry, and he ends up feeding his half-sister Rhaenyra to his dragon Sunfire in front of her son Aegon the Younger, something that would haunt the boy for the rest of his life. So now Rhaenyra is dead, fed to his dragon Sunfire. The realm seems to be a sure bet for Aegon. Some people are still rebelling, and mostly it's for fear of the consequences that if they give up, they will be labeled traitors and receive a traitor's death. Even Lord Boris Baratheon couldn't stop Rhaenyra's force and dies at the Battle of the King's Road. Young river lords known as the Lads are upon King's Landing while Lord Stark was coming down the King's Road. So things are not looking up for Aegon. He thought it was a sure bet. Rhaenyra is dead. He has Dragonstone. He can do this. He has this. And then all of a sudden it just slips out from under him. His biggest supporter, Lord Baratheon, is gone. King's Landing is being taken by Lord Stark and the River Lords, and the Sea Snake, now on the King's Small Council when they freed him from jail and pardoned him, tell King Aegon II to take the black and give up. This is not going to end well, and he refuses. And he gets in his litter to be taken to his apartments. He's given a cup of wine when getting in the litter, and later when they open the curtains to it, they find blood on his lips and he's dead. So somebody in his own people ends up poisoning him. The Dance of the Dragons is now officially done. Rhaenyra is dead, King Aegon II is dead, poisoned by his own men. The next Targaryen king of Westeros would be the mentally scarred Aegon III, a joyless man who feared dragons. In a way, him coming to the throne would kind of be validation that Rhaenyra was right in her claim, because her son ends up ruling on the throne, not Aegon and not Aegon's children. So make sure you come back. All our Game of Thrones videos are now going to be released on Sunday, and we are going to look at the next Targaryen king of Westeros, Aegon III, called Dragon's Bane, and a very unhappy man always dressing in black. Make sure you like, subscribe, and come back for more geeky videos every day.